Recent studies show that from 1999 to 2016, opioid-related mortality among adolescents and young adults increased by threefold. Teen fentanyl deaths doubled from 253 in 2019 to 680 in 2020, and then jumped to 884 this past year. Fentanyl was 77.14% the cause of drug deaths among teenagers. This leads me to my special population, dangerous trends in drug abuse, fentanyl on the rise among adolescents. My name is Harper Grabenhorst, and I will be presenting today on this. It is evident that the use of fentanyl and opioid drugs is becoming a rising problem among adolescents. Not only is this a result of the use of these drugs, but also the market that sells illicit and unsafe forms of these drugs. The illicit version of fentanyl can have a potency above that of medical-grade heroin or morphine, and the population at risk points to young teens and adolescents who are vulnerable to the addictive and detrimental nature of fentanyl. To better understand teen addiction and abuse of fentanyl, we must understand the story of fentanyl. After its discovery in 1960 in Belgium, fentanyl began to be used as an intraoperative anesthetic for pain management and especially chronic pain from various forms of cancer treatment. Fentanyl use began to become more widespread as the drug became more readily accessible on the market and in various forms such as skin patches. The transmucosal method of medicinal delivery was accessible and preferred by patients and doctors alike. As a result of this easily and readily accessible method of delivery, skin patches began to be used by those not prescribed and also replicated in illicit and dangerous manners. Thus began fentanyl addiction and abuse. Fentanyl works as a receptor agonist by blocking the receptors and neurotransmitters that would signal pain. As compared to previous opioids or drugs for pain management, fentanyl has a greater affinity to bond and stay attached to the receptor, leading to increased levels of release of pain and euphoria-like feeling. Trends for the use and abuse of fentanyl can be seen with the beginning of use and widespread use of skin patches, and then illicit fentanyl creation and use began in 2005, with markets to distribute in a non-clinical setting. The FDA has taken strides to improve product formulas that will prevent abuse and access and point people towards other opioids and pain management methods. Despite efforts, there's been a recent resurgence of abuse among all demographics. Adolescents especially are more vulnerable to the addiction and abuse of fentanyl than other age groups because of points of vulnerability. And looking at recent studies, the things that make adolescents vulnerable are their access to nicotine and other inhalants being predisposed, lowered socioeconomic profiles as seen in the Vancouver study of their drug use epicenter, social situations and stigma around drug use and abuse leading to unsupervised behaviors, impaired development of the brain becoming reliant after less usage and a lower tolerance as compared to adults, and lack of access to social supports and family supports. All of these things made adolescents more susceptible to this problem of fentanyl use and abuse. And examining trends in abuse from this graph above drawn by Washington State, other opioids like heroin and morphine have been large determiners of death rates due to opioids overdose over the past decade up until 2018, where we see a remarkable spike in fentanyl use and a downturn of all other types of opioid deaths. This can point to the severe nature of fentanyl use. In an effort to combat this problem, I would like to propose a multifaceted approach that analyzes different points of contact. The first being a social branch that leads to normalized discussion of drug use and abuse for adolescents, as well as support groups that foster reliance on each other and growth to improve with peers. The next branch would be local government efforts to provide housing opportunities to combat the socioeconomic vulnerability. Additionally, increasing police monitoring and efforts of at-risk and drug epicenters could aid in reducing vulnerability of these areas as markets. State government efforts would be focused on providing funding for houses, as well as educational funding and awareness campaigns to provide resources, methods, and support of prevention. Entertaining this in a scholastic setting would allow it to be applied to established authoritative figures and offer support outside the home. Lastly, federal government efforts must be focused on funding of research to further understand this problem and vulnerability, as well as funding for research and finding more effective ways for prevention and education. Thank you.